In this module, we start talking about Ruby. So Ruby was invented by Yukihiro Matsumoto. Version 1 came out in 96. Ruby is born in Japan. And in 2000, first English language book comes out about Ruby called Programming Ruby. And it has a picture of a pickaxe on the cover, so people start calling the book Pickaxe. And it's made famous by Rails around 2005, as we're going to see. So here's a picture of Mats and a picture of Pickaxe book. And to quote Mats, the philosophy of Ruby is that it's designed to make programming not only easy but also fun. It allows you to concentrate on the creative side of programming with less stress. So Ruby is dynamic. Ruby is object-oriented. I would say it's object-possessed. Almost everything in Ruby is an object. So whereas other languages, even object-oriented ones, for example, Java, it has primitive types, which are not objects. In Ruby, pretty much everything is an object, as we're going to see. And I think the main characteristic of Ruby is that it's elegant and expressive, as we're going to see in a few slides. So just to give an example of that, for example, if you want to print out hello world in Java, right? So this is how you would do it in Java. You have a for loop, which you have to define the I variable being 0, and then you have to keep incrementing I a few times. You have to keep testing that the I hasn't gone past 3 times, and that's how you get hello world in Java. Whereas in Ruby, you just say 3 times, print out hello world. It's very evident what is going on, and it's very expressive as a language. If you want to see the Ruby API documentation, you could go to ruby-doc.org. Obviously, I'm going to be covering a lot of APIs in class, but if you want to see all the possible APIs, you could see it on ruby-doc.org. Comments. You use a hashtag for comments in Ruby. This is what's called a line comment. So everything after the hashtag is a comment on that same line. Now the comment I make here is that comments in Ruby should be used in stingy moderation. Really, because Ruby is so expressive as a language, the language itself, your code, should tell the story, and you shouldn't need too many comments. The 2 ways to print something out to console in Ruby is either to use P or to use puts, and just the difference is that P prints out the internal representation of an object, like debugger style, whereas puts actually converts it to a string and then outputs it. So if you're used to doing things in Java, system.outPrintLine is pretty much the equivalent of puts. It converts an object to a string, so put stands for put string. It converts an object to a string, and then it prints it out. So for example, puts 5 would just print out 5, puts something else would print out something else. Naming conventions, and these are very important. The variables in Ruby are named lowercase. If you're going to have 2 or more words that you want to capture as a variable name, it would be an underscore. So snake, what they call a snake case, because it almost looks like there's a snake crawling. So snake underscore case, that would be a variable name if it's a regular variable. If it's a constant, it would either be all caps with an underscore, or it would be what's called a camel case. So first cap here. So for example, classes, class names or module names are going to be camel case. Semicolons, you could leave them off. You don't need a semicolon. If you really have to cram a few statements on the same line, then you could use a semicolon, but it's pretty much discouraged. If you use a semicolon, they right away know that you're a Java programmer. So Ruby has what's called an IRB, which is interactive Ruby. And it's basically what's called a REPL, which is read, evaluate, print loop. Many languages have this, and Ruby also has it built into the language. So when you install Ruby, you automatically get this thing called IRB, Interactive Ruby, and it lets you try things out quickly without an editor. So you just basically type in IRB and you're ready to go. And the comment I make here is that in Ruby, anything evaluates to something, right? So whereas, for example, in Java, hello world would be meaningless. You can't just have a hello world. What does that even mean? You could assign it to something and then use it, but in Ruby, you don't even have to do that. Hello world also means something. And we're going to see that that is an important part of the language. So in this case, we're saying that hello world, if you do an enter at this point, you'll see that that evaluates the hello world. Now, you could also print hello world. So in this case, what you're doing is you're printing out hello world. And that's what this is. Hello world is being printed out. Now, what's actually being returned from puts is nil, right? Because printing itself, a print function itself, doesn't return a value. It returns a nil. The side effect of printing something is printing it. So that's what hello world is. But the actual return from the put statement is nil. And speaking of nil, in many languages, nil means the absence of an object. Whereas in Ruby, nil itself, so the semantics obviously is that there's no object there, but nil itself is an object. Remember what I mentioned about Ruby being object possessed? And you could ask the nil, what is your class? Then the class of nil is nil class. You could ask any object, including nil, are you a nil? And nil would say true. Other things would say, no, I'm false. And you could even print out, you could do a puts on a nil, which gets converted to an empty string. So to run a Ruby file, so this is just showing you how you see what the version of Ruby you're using. But to actually execute the Ruby file, you could do Ruby and then the file name .rb, and that actually executes the Ruby file.